Hello, hello. Hope you guys are doing well. We're going to get into some mastering today, and I thought it'd be pretty fun to just kind of do a live with you. A lot of people want to know what mastering is, and I think a lot of people don't really understand the art and the science of mastering. I think they think it's you turn ozone on, right? you ozone and you make things loud, and that's mastering, right? So I'm just going to kind of go into kind of basic session setup and where mastering, how it starts and where we go with it and how we kind of think and the process behind mastering music for, let's say, an EP, which is what I'm working on right now for a client, Heido Campos. So he's a reggaeton artist, and we got features on the songs, and we got, we want this loud, big bottom, low end, big drums, reggaeton vibes. So I'm going to get into sort of how I set up that session. I master in Pro Tools. I master in Logic Pro. I could really master in any DAW, and so can you, kids. You don't need a specific DAW to master. People just prefer certain mastering software for the tools that they give you. But I'm going to be talking about my chain and why I'm using my chain, the plugins I'm using. I'm going to be doing all in-the-box mastering. It's very typical in 2023 to be doing a lot of in-the-box mastering. With mastering, a big thing that, just to give you kind of like the prelude to mastering and to understand what we're doing here, mastering is really about the format you're going to. It's the final step in putting out that last thing. So that means, are you mastering for vinyl? Okay, that's a different process than mastering for CD. Are you mastering for streaming services, Spotify versus Apple Music versus Tidal? They're all kind of different processes. They all use different, I guess the best way to put it is metadata and formats, right? So AAC3 for Apple Music, and you have Spotify, which is typically going to be like a WAV file. Want to talk about a little bit of metadata and what that even means and how to put your metadata into your records, and just kind of the vibe and the process of setting this whole thing up. So if you're here right now, say what's up, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, definitely subscribe. Y'all are weak-ass motherfuckers for not subscribing. I give out free game. I do free mastering, mixing sessions, live song reviews, all sorts of stuff, and free content all the time. So, there's really no reason not to be subscribed. But let's get into it. I'm working in Pro Tools today. So I am in Pro Tools, and typically when I get into a session for mastering, the biggest thing you have to understand is your room, your speakers, maybe something that you're really used to, like the headphones you always use for a secondary check. But for the most part, you really just need a very, very good, balanced listening environment that you're very, very, very familiar with that is going to translate well. I will leave actually a whole list of my gear and what I use in my studio. But I'm using the Dutch and Dutch 8Cs, which are absolutely mastering grade monitors. These monitors here are about $18,000 for a pair of them. They're cardioid. They are three-way system. So you have a tweeter, you have a mid driver that goes down to 100 hertz. All of that is cardioid, so it blows out the front, has offside rejection on the speakers, much like a cardioid microphone, like a TLM 103. And then I also use the Apollo for conversion. The Apollo is not like super mastering grade conversion and clocking, but I find that it does a pretty damn good job, and it goes all the way down, low subs, and goes all the way to the top. And it's pretty musical for conversion, and I'm just really used to it. I've been using Apollos for, the last, 3 or 4 revisions of Apollos and the racks, right? So I'm very, very familiar with the conversion. Now I've used, of course, a bunch of different converters and different studio rooms and all that. But the most important thing for mastering is to understand how things translate, right? Because we really want translatability. We want things to sound awesome on headphones, on cheap speakers, on amazing monitors that cost $18,000, the ATCs in the $1 million mastering room. We want the record to sound good everywhere, and depending on what you're targeting for the mastering, that's really what we do mastering for. So I'm constantly wondering what the client wants, right? You can find out a lot by listening to the music. For this client, it's going to be mainly for streaming. It's a 7-song EP. It's definitely made for, let's make this sound as good as possible for Spotify, right? Spotify being number 1, Apple Music being number 2, and maybe Tidal, and the streaming platforms. It just has to translate. It has to sound really, really good on those platforms. So I'm going to kind of give you guys some tips and tricks and things along the way as I set this up and tell you kind of how you would make things sound the best they could possibly sound for the streaming services. And you're going to hear a lot of bullshit information out there from people that just do not know what they're talking about. And just so you can understand like why you would listen to me and, you know, not someone else. I've mixed and mastered at this point thousands of records in all sorts of different genres. I have platinum record, Grammy, Oscar, Emmy nominated, Academy Award nominated, Golden Globe nominated work under my belt and projects that I've worked on. Okay, so I've kind of seen and heard every side of the fence. I release my own records, right? But I've worked with major labels. I've worked with major, you know, motion picture places, whatever. So there's a lot of different credentials that I've had and different environments and professional work that I've worked on. And I've also worked on very independent artists, people that have just put out their very first record. So I'm not here trying to brag. I'm just telling you like why I actually know what the fuck I'm talking about. Okay, so you can listen to me, and you can also, I always encourage you guys, like always be researching and studying up on game on the latest techniques, the latest plugins, and the latest news and software and all that stuff. But let's get into it. Without further ado, who's in the house, by the way? I want to say what's up. Yo, Brian Olson in the house. It's good to see you, bro. Clinton, what's up? What's up? All right, the Future Sound Beat. You're always here, man. He's ready. He's ready for game. All right, so I'm going to get you guys really going on this. Depending on, it doesn't really matter what DAW you're using. You could be using Logic. You could be using Pro Tools. You could use FL Studio. You could use Ableton to master. It doesn't matter, okay? I just want to make that really, really clear. Like the mastering program that you use to master your final master, to go to streaming, to go to CD, to go to vinyl, whatever, is just software. It's just zeros and ones. Got it? Cool. Okay. Now you're going to hear a lot of bad information on that too, right? You'll be on TikTok and this DAW sounds different. Bro, you can, the best way to test this, if you want to know if a DAW sounds different or not, and to prove anybody right or wrong, bounce something out of Pro Tools, bounce something out of Logic, bounce something out of Ableton Live, right? And then put those two files, those different files in one session in any DAW, flip the phase on one of the files. And if you hear any noise whatsoever, then yes, the softwares are different. But if you don't hear any noise, if it goes to zero because you flipped it out of phase completely with itself, it's exactly the same thing, okay? So that's a really great way to prove that bullshit wrong, okay? All right, let's see. That's my dream. Before I leave this earth, make some crazy records. I'll always be remembered. Awesome. So you're in the right spot because I'm going to just try and teach you guys as much as I know. Okay. And I'm not claiming to know everything. I'm always studying game. I'm always learning from people that know a lot more than I do about certain things. Okay. So as I always drop the file into the session, and the first thing you're always going to have from the artist is you're going to have the assets. And I always highly recommend you ask for references. Like, what are you guys trying to hit? Like, what's the loudness you're trying to hit? What's the overall vibe you're trying to hit? What do you want this to sound like and feel like, right? And obviously, I'm going to put my input into it because, you know, I'm a mastering engineer. I'm a mixing engineer. I'm a producer. I've written songs. I've, you know, been in music for most of my life. So I'm going to have my own vibe. And that's why people would come to me to have me master or mix or produce for them, right? Because I'm always going to add my own sauce. Okay, so Haido, he gave me a master reference track. He's got 3 tracks here. I'm going to show you exactly how to drop those into a little cheat code here in the session so you can bounce back and forth. He's got a message here. So he's got, hey, here's what I'm looking for. 7 songs. You always want to read the notes twice. Read them 3 times, you know? Like in mastering, it's all about paying attention. It's about being very organized. It's about being good at following direction and also being an artist. So you're using both sides of your brain with mastering. And that's why I love it so much, because it really is both sides of the brain. Same with mixing. So there's a message here and you want to read that through and you really want to understand it. And he's saying, hey, look, I got some references in here. We're kind of going for those vibes, right? We want to match like the loudness overall and the vibes overall. Okay, and then we got the mixes. So here are the mixes for mastering. We want to make sure that he left enough headroom for everything to give me enough headroom so that I can actually master, right? So that's really important as well. Now, every song's going to be different. I can have 3 dB of headroom. I can have 5 dB of headroom on a record. You know, you're going to know right away as an engineer, like how much headroom you have to mess with. And if you need more, sometimes you need to hit the client up and say, hey, look, I need more headroom on this. Like I want to push this a little bit harder with my tools and with my ear and experience and my speakers and my room. I can hear these subtleties in the low end that you may not be capturing, you may not be hearing. And I can really mess with that low end and make this a louder, prouder record, wider, deeper, all that good stuff, punchier, fatter, etc. So you might want to ask for more headroom. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just drag and drop all of these files right directly into Pro Tools. Okay. So in Pro Tools, you're going to have all your files go. It's going to populate all your files. It's going to draw out the waveforms. The other thing you're going to see is he's got a track list with the ISRC codes. This is part of a mastering engineer's job as well, is to put all of the metadata into the files. And I'm not going to get too much into that. I'm just really going to get into setup and how this all works. But I do want to put these in track order just because I want to feel out how they have the track order. So, como será la primera vez, loco, oite, otra nota, tragos, tu recuerdo. Okay, those are the tracks. That's 1 through 7. So what I want to do is I want to match that up. So como será la primera. Okay, so we're going to go como será la primera. So it looks like he's already kind of got this in the same format. So we got como será la primera, and then what? Loco, and then oite, and then we got otra nota, and we got tragos, and we got tu recuerdos. Okay, so it's already in track list, right? So we're good. Okay, and the next thing I like to do, and let's pretend this isn't here, this otra nota, because I actually need to remaster this because they added a fade to it, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide and make inactive that track that I've already done. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to use, let's use like a shuffle here so that we can shuffle these and the actual tracks so we can put them in order, okay? And the reason I like to do that is because I want to hear the actual like track flow. So what I do is I turn it into shuffle so that they lock into the next track. So I'm going to zoom way out and I'm going to show you, like, I'm going to take all these up and then I'm going to take them all back down. Like you'll see what I'm saying in a second here. And the reason I do this is because this is the flow of the record. So as a mastering engineer, we're making the flow of the EP. So this is what's going to happen. They're going to butt up against each other on the record, right? If you played this back to back, that's what's going to happen. Track 1, track 2, track 3, track 4, track all the way to 7. So we want to make sure that that's all in the track format and in the track list, exactly how they have it listed out, 1 through 7. Okay, super important. So once I have it on shuffle, then I'm going to take it back to grid. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to bring these guys back down. So you can use like Command X and that'll cut it. And then you can go down to the track and then you can go Command V. Now, the reason I obviously did the shuffle at first is because I want them all to butt up against each other. And that's just a really easy way to make sure that they're butting up against each other. For me, right? You can do whatever you want. So let's go down and then Command V on the next track. And I'm just going to put these all in order. That's all I'm doing right now. So if you have any questions, let me know, guys, as I go along with this. And I always do the cut and paste because I know it's going to be perfect. Like if I drag it down, it could slip even if I'm holding a key command to make it not slip, all that stuff. So I just do this because it's kind of an OCD thing, right? So cut and paste. All right, so now we have our track order going, right? It's like track 1, track 2, track 3, track 4, track 5, so it goes all the way down. So the next thing, and I'm just trying to give you guys some game on how you set this whole thing up. I'm not going to take you through all the process of me mastering all these 7 tracks because it will take me some time to do this. As you can see, all the tracks are different levels. I always read the waveforms. I'm looking at where are the choruses, where are the loudest parts of the tracks, etc. All right. Yo, Brian, what's up? What's up? All right. I have FL Studio, now Studio One. I've never thought of testing them that way before. I'll give it a go. Just out of curiosity. Yeah. So yeah, you could use whatever you want. All right. So couple things I want to look at. The first thing is obviously I want to play all these songs. I want to get familiar with them. Like that's a really important aspect of mastering, is just being a really good listener, right? But I also want to make sure these are all going out the master output. So the master output is my mastering chain. I've already mastered a record from this 7-song EP, and that is Otra Nota. Okay, so as I look at Otra Nota, let's just get some information just visually, right? Visually looking at this, you could see that this is kind of the loudest part of the record right here, right? So you can see like it bumped up. You can also hold down shift and we can kind of pull, or sorry, option, and we're going to pull all these tracks to be bigger so we can really see the waveform views. Okay, and you can see Otra Nota is like actually pretty dynamic compared. And this is pretty dynamic as well. Oite, it's just that it has like an A and a B part. So I'm just kind of like taking mental notes as I set this up, right? This looks really loud. Tragos looks really loud. Okay, so this right here looks like maximized already. So that might be something where I go, hey, Jairo, can I get a Tragos with a little bit more headroom? But before I ask for that, of course, I'm going to listen to it. But an important part is just kind of looking at all these waveforms and understanding like what is going on with these, right? So this is a really big aspect of understanding where you should start with your mastering process. Now looking at Tragos, looks kind of the loudest and the most peaked, flattened, and then also Loco. Loco looks pretty flattened as well. So I want to look at these two, Tragos and Loco, right? And you see these? This one and this one. And I want to start playing through these and really understanding where they're hitting on the LUFs, on the peak meter, on the RMS, all that stuff. Because when you're mastering an EP of 7 songs, they all have to fit together, right? Obviously, it's 2023, so you can kind of, you know, get away with one record being a little louder than the other. Maybe that's the single, and it's just like a little louder. It's just all records are going to sound different as well, depending on the mid-range information, how much low end they have, how much high end, all that stuff. But the mid-range is really what's going to be the thing that we hear psychoacoustically as the loudest. That's what makes a record loud. Okay, so that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at, yo, this one looks real loud. It looks like pretty peaked out and sausage. And then Otra Nota was what I already mastered. So this is going to be fucking, it's already going to sound super dope through my chain I have already. So what we want to do is just kind of find the loudest track and then set our levels from that loudest track. Okay. So you don't really want to just start with track 1. Like, oh, let's start with Como Será. Like that would be kind of like an amateur thing to do with mastering. All right. So a couple tools I'm using to set this session up, right, is going to be obviously my chain and my plugins, but this adapter plugin, AB Metric, which is really, really dope. The reason it's dope is because I can flip between all the different tracks that he gave me as references. And then I can play it back to back with what I'm mastering. And I can understand like what's happening, you know, like I listen obviously, but I'm A-Bing it and going, am I getting the same kind of mid-range fullness, wideness, depth, punch? Are the drums hitting as hard as the reference, right? Because that's what he's competing against and that's what his references are. Okay. And then this is really cool. Like you have all these like loop playback vibes, you have latch. You can turn the gain up or down. You can match the gain, right? So you could do something like that where you're matching the gain. So you're not kind of, you know, teased by how loud the record is. And then you can also see there's dynamic section, there's stereo image, there's correlation, spectrum. And then there's a loudness meter, which is really helpful, right? So like, for example, if I play this, a Nika, let's see this. Let's just watch the meters so you can hear it and see it.
Salgo a gastarle unos pocos. Música en el Lambo pa' que te relajes conmigo nada más. Todo el mundo me tiene la dilema. Tiene mucha habilidad. Ella sabe lo que da. Le frontea a sus amigas. Dice que es única. Tiene la disco explotar. Todo el mundo me la mira. Pide conmigo nada más. Tiene mucha habilidad. Ella sabe lo.
Okay, so I did something like that's a total no-no, is I have like all my mastering plugins on right now. So I have it at the last part of the chain, but I still think that these are actually causing this to sound different. So if I want to bypass all my plugins here, I can actually use different key commands, but if you want to just bypass them completely, it's Command, Control, and click, right? So you can just click on every single one of these. So just hearing these with nothing on it and just the adapter plugin, just listening to the record, this is what it sounds like. All right, so we're hitting around like -7 dB LUFs, which I think is a really good spot to hit. And a big tip for you guys that are here right now, when you're mastering for Spotify, a lot of people are like, you got to master to -14 LUFs. Like, that's complete bullshit. Like, all that is bullshit. It's so stupid. So if you master for Spotify, whether it's like for its normalization algorithm, which is basically it's going to turn it up or down depending on the LUFs and how loud you mastered it. If you master it to -14, your record's going to sound so quiet compared to other records. It just is, right? You're going to have a really quiet record. It might be very dynamic, but it's not going to compete. So I find personally that the record is going to compete when you got the mid-range really popping and you got a nice high end, where the high end is actually like clear and defined and kind of sparkly. I use harmonics a lot, harmonic distortion to help that. You want perceived loudness, and you want to stay around, I'd say negative. If you go to -5, that's probably as hot as I would ever go on anything, you know, and that really depends on the record. Sometimes the record wants -5, but that's really hot. So I stay around -7. And once you pass -7, -6.5 or so, the Spotify, Apple, Tidal, all these like little robots jump in and they compress your format even more. And what ends up happening is you made this really loud thing, but now it's streaming at a bit rate that's really small, and there's compressors and turning down algorithms going on. So your record gets really, really tiny. And you're like, why does my shit sound so bad once it goes on Spotify? It sounded so loud and so big when I mastered it. Yeah, you got to know these things. It's a very important aspect to mastering in 2023 and beyond, I'm sure. So I'm looking at this, and I'm just going to go through some of these tracks, and I'm just going to kind of like listen for what he's hearing and what he's liking about these tracks. Un ratito más quédate y me di la botella strike. Cada foto que tú subes, baby, le doy like. Vamos a romper el bajo como me cae. Donde yo te coja, ya tú sabes la que hay. No hay por qué darle. Mi bellaquera tiene la cura, pero frente a la gente tú disimulas. O si quieres pégate y hagamos eso que no haces con más nadie. No hay por qué darle detalle. Okay, and then when you click the A-B, obviously you're going from the A, or the B, which is all these tracks here, to the blue, which is A, which is going to be your session, right? So what I'm going to listen to now is I'm going to listen to where I was with Otra Nota, because this is the first one I ever mastered for him. Okay, so let's turn everything back on. And this was literally the chain for Otra Nota, and then I will kind of run you through that a little bit and why I have these plugins and what I'm doing with them. But here's the adapter A-B for Otra Nota. So I'm listening to Otra Nota through the mastering chain now. So that's what we're going to listen to. Por eso ella mueve como mueve. Ella solo busca cuando conviene y se pone mal si no le llegue. Me tienes arrebatado aquí a tu lado. Nunca más te he llamado. En el club te vi gozando. ¿Quieres otra nota? Me tienes a un lado. Si no estás, ¿qué está pasando contigo? Que ya no nos vemos. Ven conmigo y atrévete. Sé que te va a gustar. Después del club, tírame en el Instagram. Tú tírame para ver pa' dónde va. Mamacita. Okay, so my job is to kind of like match overall vibe. Obviously, you're not going to get exactly like you're not going to match the record, just because these records are different than what he's got. Like in his, he's got a lot of reverb. He's got a lot of spatial stuff going on with the vocals. Okay, so those are kind of like listening back and forth from the references to what I've already mastered and going through my mastering chain. Okay, so hopefully you understand that. And if you guys have any questions, let me know. What do we got? As a Logic Pro user myself, Pro Tools looks more fun to mix in. Yeah, Pro Tools is great. It's a lot cleaner to mix in for me. Logic gets a little bit stuffy and congested. I think the mixer for Pro Tools is a little bit cleaner. So like if I went to the mixer, you know, it's like very, very clean, very obvious. So you got inserts, you got sends. It's all just like, it's very similar to Logic as well though. But if I make like a send, I'm not going to get an extra bus. Like Logic always just makes an augs. So that's kind of nice about Pro Tools. But I prefer mixing and mastering in Pro Tools. I prefer composing, producing in Logic Pro. All right. So are you going to use the same, let me see. Are you going to use the same mastering chain for all the tracks? It depends. Right? So I know now, like that's my otra nota. I already know that that's like good to go. I've already bounced that. I've already approved that, right? So if I'm going to use that as kind of the reference, I would bounce this and then I would bring that back into the session and use it as a reference for the rest of the record. Okay, meaning like I would actually bounce this otra nota and then I would bring it back in and throw it into the adapter. Okay, so then I can use it as a reference here. So I can A/B it against the references and what I've already mastered. Okay, so but I'm not here to like show you guys exactly how I'm going to master something. That's just not really that interesting because what I'm doing typically is based on just ear training and exactly what I'm hearing, and you know I'm tweaking and I'm moving and doing stuff for a specific reason, and it would just be really kind of boring for me to explain that. So I will explain this master because I've already kind of done this, the otra nota, and what I'm doing here. So let's just kind of go through these plugins and I'll bypass them in and out so you can kind of hear what they're doing and you can hear where it's going and where it came from, all that kind of stuff, right? So here's otra nota, and I'm going to kind of start with the variable mu. So the variable mu is just going to kind of give you glue. It also gives a little bit of harmonic distortion through the tubes. So I drive the input just a little bit, but you're going to barely see this needle moving, right? So let's listen through these.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo busca cuando conviene.
So when I bring that in and out, what do you guys hear? Like I'd love to like hear this from your guys' perspective, because I can tell exactly what I'm hearing and I know exactly what I'm listening for, but I'd love to hear, like, I'm going to A/B this with the manly in and out, and just tell me exactly what you're hearing. Like, what are you feeling? What is happening with the mix? What's happening with the vocals? What's happening with the mid range? What's happening with the low end when I turn this on and off? Okay. That's what I want to hear from you guys. All right. So here's the manly, massive, passive. We're bringing it in and out.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo busca cuando conviene y se pone mal si no le llegue. Me tienes arrebatado aquí a tu lado, nunca más te he llamado.
All right, what are you guys hearing? I'd love to hear what you guys think about that. Just because like I want to know what you're hearing and how you're feeling about it when I A/B that. Okay, it glues everything together. Well put. Anyone else? Yeah. The Future Sound Beats got it right. Y'all should be liking this. Y'all should be sharing the show. If you're getting anything out of it. If you don't like it, then, you know, get out of here. I'm not here for, you know, I'm not here to torture you or anything. You feel me? Okay. So all I got is gravity and saying it glues everything together. Tight low end and brings out the volume. That's interesting. Okay. So that's a interesting way to put it, and I think that's a really I think the best way I would explain this, and I'll let a couple more people. Anybody else? You need me to A/B it again? Like, really think about this, because this is what we do as mastering engineers. We're here to shape the record. We're here to really make sure that it competes, make sure that it has what any expensive record sounds like, okay? So this is what I got. It glues everything together, tight low end, and brings out the volume. Now I'm going to play it one more time from the exact same spot. I'm going to A/B it in and out. And then I'm going to explain to you exactly what it's doing in my ear and in my room and what I'm trying to do with this.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella.
All right, so the first thing you're going to notice, song gain more life and shape. Okay, good. That's really important. This comment is really important. When the song gains more life and shape. Now, why is that? The first thing you're going to notice is there is a perceived loudness happening. It's not getting louder. The perceived loudness, I'm not adding any gain, okay? So it's actually taking off a little bit. It's compressing a little bit. And then my output is, I guess I'm bringing in some gain. Okay, so I am bringing some gain. So the first thing is it is louder right away. So you're going to hear it louder, but the perceived loudness comes from the tubes. It comes from the mid-range is getting saturated harmonically. The whole track is getting saturated harmonically with the tubes on the input drive, okay? And what that ends up doing is it helps the record jump out of the speakers. It helps it become wider, and it helps it become deeper. Now, this time when you hear it, I want you to pay attention to what happens to the sides, okay? The sides information. It goes from something that sounds more mono and more flat and more back to something that comes out and expands, okay? That's very, very important to what this plugin is doing and what the hardware unit would be doing as well. So A/Bing it, listen for the wideness, the stereo imaging.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo ve.
All right, so you hear it now? You hear like the synths kind of pop out, and then the reverbs of those synths and the vocals like go back further. It's because you're taking something that has a frequency to it, maybe like let's say it sticks at like 500, right? Like the synth, that frequency is getting saturated. So anything along with like the reverb tails and everything else, it's taking that frequency and it's adding saturation to it. So it's adding thickness, right? So the thickness goes for the reverb tails, the delays, everything, which thickens it out, okay? Yeah, glues it. And everybody likes to say glues because that's kind of what we associate that with, is glue. Tube, saturation, SSL compressors, VCAs, things like that. We say glue because that's what it's doing. Like you have a fundamental frequency, maybe the kick drum's going boo, boo, boo. With harmonic distortion and glue, we're getting a doo, doo, doo. Instead of a doo, doo, it's going doo, doo, doo. It's adding harmonics, okay? Very, very, very key to making a loud, proud, competitive record is harmonic content, okay? And I'm using a shit ton of harmonic stuff. Okay, so next up, we have the BX Digital. This isn't really going to be fair because I'm using some gain structure here, which is bringing it down 0.5 dB on the output, but I'm also adding 3 dB or 0.3 dB at 105, dB at 900. This is one thing I noticed that really lacked in the record was the mid-range, okay? And this is just the middle, so I'm trying to hit the vocals with that. Then I got 30.99. I'm taking that down by almost a dB because that area was like really pokey to me, that 4K area. And then of course I'm hitting 8K as well because that's like a harmonic of 4K, right? It's like the multiplier. And then at 12K, nothing here. But I am rolling out 25 hertz. I'm going 12 dB slope. So I'm taking out some of the stuff that was just too big in the sub. All right, just so I can get more level. And then I'm giving it a little bit of stereo width, so just 3%. And then I'm doing some stuff on the side to carve, okay? So I'm going to pop this in and out so you can hear what this is doing.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees, de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere, cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo busca cuando conviene y se pone mal si no le llegue, me tienes.
Okay, so that's really like just, it's almost just like opening it up. That's all we're doing. We're just kind of clearing room, making it bigger, wider, more separated. More separated is the best way to put it. Vocal, like really pay attention to this 900 area, and I'll solo it so you can really understand what I'm doing there.
No estás a mi lado. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, como crees, de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere, cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo busca cuando conviene y se pone mal si no le llegue, me tienes nunca más te he llamado, en el club te vi gozando, quiere otra nota, me tienes a un lado, esperando otra.
Now, why did I add that 900? Why did I push that forward? Because that's like literally the body of the vocal in this. You know, it's that frequency. And what I noticed in the record is it was missing that frequency from these other records. So if I go back to the A-B matrix and I listen to these references, it had this really nice warm middle for the vocals.
Qué rica se ve tu piel cuando te quemes, rica se ve tu piel cuando te quemes, no nos vemos. Yo te pienso cada vez que
baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere, cuando quiere.
Cuando me pongo pa' ti, a veces me
busca cuando conviene.
Tú solo pégate, es arrebatado. Te dije por mensaje, no me llamaste, llama, no, y yo contigo nunca insisto, no.
Otra nota, me tiene.
I mean, let's be real. I'm kicking the shit out of these masters. I mean, these other tracks don't sound as good as my master. I mean, you guys fight me about it in the comments, but some of these are just like really not that good. And it has a lot to do with the mix. Like the vocals on this one are really weird, like really awkward, like peaky in the low mids, really woofy. Doesn't sound very good. Okay, so I try to find the one that sounds the best, and I find that part that sounds the best of these references, and I try to beat that. That's my whole game plan. All right, so let's listen to the next thing. I got the oven. The oven is doing so much for the low end, okay? And I want you to really pay attention to the low end as I bypass this in and out.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees, de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere, cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo busca cuando conviene y se pone mal si no le llegue, me tienes arrebatado, aquí a.
Right, it makes that sub kind of come to life. It helps it also to translate to like smaller speakers, that sub, because the sub is really low. So it's like so low. But if you add a little bit of fuzz to it, which is what I'm doing with the oven, is you have the low burner, right? You can see I'm cranking that pretty good. But also, like, I'm just blending this into parallel at 43%. So if I really crank this, like, let's turn it all the way up so you can really hear it.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees, de todas
right, so hopefully you understand why I'm paralleling it. And I use this plugin in parallel when I'm mastering because it's something where if you throw this on the master bus, you're really trying to cause change. You know, this is a pretty ballsy move when you start to master with something like the oven, because this is just like distortion. It's tube distortion, it's transistors, it's VCA distortion, it's all a bunch of stuff. So this is really kind of bringing things out a little bit more. It's bringing it to life, more harmonics. So if I bypass all three of these, right, this is what we get.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila.
So I'm giving it this modern idea, right? This modern vibe of like in your face and mid range, and you know, I'm here and I'm here to be listened to, and I'm not to be fucked around with, you know what I'm saying? So that's kind of like what that's doing. And it's still keeping it really musical. Like the harmonic distortion is not, it's not like super aggressive. It's just warm. It's like hugging everything, you know? So that's kind of the idea with those first three. All right. And then we got the Limitless. Limitless, very magical plugin. And this is kind of like a peak limiter meets a, I don't know how to put it, like brick wall. So it's like a peak limiter and a brick wall limiter put together. So you kind of have like this dynamic EQ idea, which I'm saying like compress more or less of certain frequencies within these bands, which is really dope. And then I could set a ceiling and a threshold overall. And then there's a style and the release time and all that stuff. So this is going to obviously add some gain, but then as it adds gain, it also adds in back in those frequencies I didn't really like. So that 4K, I'm taking it back down 0.6, right? And then it's also going to make the low end really get big. So I'm taking that down 0.7. And that's really it. That's all I'm doing. I'm just tucking those frequencies on that first kind of dynamic EQ compression level, and then I'm hitting the brick wall. Okay, so I'm hitting that brick wall of 0.1 dB. So let's pop this in and out, and you'll hear kind of the gain that I'm getting from it.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo busca cuando conviene y se aquí a tu lado.
That's a magical plugin, right? So even as I solo out that band, you can kind of hear that crunch. And I like that crunch. Like people are afraid of that. They're like, "Oh, it's distorting. I should turn it down even more." Like, go for it. You know, like I don't care what you do, but that's going to help it cut. That's going to help the transients be there, right? The life of the kick drum, the life of the snare, that extra little, you know, that little crispiness that's going to happen in the speakers. That's going to help it jump out. So it doesn't sound lifeless. So we really want to keep the record really like tons of just bright and like, you know, everything's hitting and it's moving and it's pumping and it's sounding really good. All right. So that's what I'm doing there. And then the BX Master Desk, which is really interesting that I use this. I never use this, but I am using it for a little bit of the de-esser and the comp mix. So I'm blending in parallel compression to really get this record to really be loud. And you'll see this thing is fucking magic as well. But this thing can be overdone very, very easy to where it like will break up.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo busca cuando conviene y se pone mal si no le llegue, me tienes arrebatado.
Right, this is like pushing it to the limit, man. Like this plugin is really magic. Like as far as parallel compression goes, this is the shit, man. Like the comp mix, like listen to this as I do the comp mix and I bring it up and down and like just listen to how much it fills it out.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere.
Also, like, you're bringing the vocal back out, right? Without squashing the drums too much, because the drums are really loud in this mix. So the drums are like hitting so hard. You have to be really careful with not smashing the transients and killing the life of the drums, which is obviously what most people would do when they're mastering their own music, because they just don't know what they're doing. Like, I'll be real. And they're not hearing it right. That's the truth. Okay. So, and you may not even agree with what I'm doing with the master, but I'm not mastering your song. I'm mastering for my client, and I'm trying to do what my client wants. And my client tells me, here are the references, beat this shit. Okay, I'm going to beat that shit. That's what I'm doing. Okay, so Goldfoss master, just doing a little bit here. Tame and recover, not touching anything below 40 hertz, not touching anything above 16K, and I'm doing a little smiley face stuff here. So really the boost is going to give it more low end and warmth. Okay, so let's check this out. A-B it.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees, de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere, cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo busca cuando conviene.
Right, just helps separate things after I've glued it so much. So I've used a lot of different, little bit of that, little cleanup there, a little widening, a little bit of that to give it a little more harmonics in the bottom. Remember, we're just paralleling it in 40%. Limitless to give it some level to help keep the transients alive. Limitless is a magic plugin because of that. You should watch the plugin of the week on Limitless. You should understand this plugin. It's magic, okay? It works great on the drum mix bus. If you want to get your drums all popping and you want to get them leveled out before they hit your master bus, you want to use this plugin. It's amazing because it has that ability to let transients through but still get things loud and limited, right? So it's a great peak limiter. And this dynamic kind of, banded compressor kind of thing is just amazing as well. You can read a lot more about it and watch the plugin of the week. You'll understand it better. BX Master Bus, we're getting parallel. So parallel perceive loudness with this, right? So comp mix, we're also adding some level, obviously. So I'm constantly just adding a little bit of level with each plugin. Goldfoss then kind of shapes that level, shapes the harmonics, spreads it out a little bit more again, okay? And sometimes Goldfoss can get really peaky. It can like start to bring out certain things and get a little too shiny and too sterile and digital. So then I pop in Soothe 2 after all of that to just kind of like sort out the problem frequencies that I'm having in the master. Now remember, I'm not mixing this. If I was mixing this, I would just solve this shit in the mix. You feel me? Like I would look at the 4K area that's so fucked up for my ears and I'd fix it. Also this 8K area, 7.5 or whatever, really, just brittle. And then I'm letting the top come through. Okay. And then here I'm actually looking at about 100 to what this probably stops around like 400, right? I'm just kind of like helping that not be so chubby and chunky. Okay, and this is mixed in, again, parallel, 74%. I'm not using 100% on this. Okay, so that's what the Soothe 2 is doing. I'll pop this in and out.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees, de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere, cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve.
Man, it just like makes it so smooth, right? The top end gets so smooth. It's so nice. And that's like that butter, that 2023 mastering. It's just butter. And then I finish everything off with the God Particle. God Particle is going to be my last stage of limiting. I'm going to shape the EQ even more. So you can see I'm popping the mids back a little bit more. Why am I popping the mids back? When you push the mids, Brad, why you push 900 and then you tuck it back? Because everything is working together. You do something to something, it's going to change something else, okay? Always. That's what mixing is. That's what mastering is. So as I bring this mid back, it just kind of smooths out that mid range because you're hitting a limiter. A limiter brings everything back up. You know what I'm saying? So you're setting a peak and you're saying low level information, come up, right? That's like all the low level information, right? And then you're using your gain, your makeup gain or whatever. You're going like this, right? You're not just taking everything down and then bringing it up. Like you're taking everything down, you're bringing low level information up so that like your peaks and your RMS are getting smaller and smaller. That's your crest factor, right? But you don't want it to sound smashed. You still want those transients like ba, 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 even though they're like within inches of the RMS, you know? This is the crest factor. This is your RMS. This is your peak, your snare drum, your kick drum. The heaviest thing that's hitting at a transient level, it's hitting the peak and it's getting knocked down, tick, 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 right? But then you're bringing all this low-level information up. The RMS, the parallel compression, the saturation, the harmonics is making this like sound louder. That's what it does. But you don't want your life to be squashed. So you use harmonics and you use tools like, you know, Limitless, and you use, you know, distortion, and you use all this shit. But then you shape it. You have to shape it. All right, so let's listen to this in and out.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere, cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo busca cuando conviene y se pone mal si no le llegue. Me tienes arrebatado, o si quieres pégate y hagamos eso que me llama. En el club te vi gozando. Quieres otra nota, me tiene pa' hacerte todo lo otra. Si no estás a mi lado, baby.
I mean, sorry, like I'm kicking the shit out of these masters. I don't know, man. Like these guys gotta hire me to master their shit. I'm just playing. But yeah, they should. So that's it. That's the whole vibe, right? That's about an hour with you guys just showing you game. Like that's exactly how I master. And this is like super heavy-handed mastering. Like, let's be real. Some tracks are like within inches of life. Like you can't even do that much with it. And every time you guys look at these like little clip indicators, you guys fuck yourself up. You're like, oh man, I gotta back off. I gotta back off. Like, no, you're turning plugins on and off. Like you have limiters on. It's not gonna go over 0.
No estás a mi lado, yeah. Como quieres, dale como mueve ese reggaetón, como prende la consuela, yeah. Como crees de todas las mujeres, brinda, fuma, baila, se atreve cuando quiere, ella quiere, cuando quiere, por eso ella mueve como mueve, ella solo busca cuando conviene y se pone mal si no le llegue. Me tienes arrebatado aquí a tu lado, nunca más te he llamado. En el club te vi gozando. Quieres otra nota, me tienes a un lado, esperando otra. Y terminamos en la playa, está todo oscuro. Y te tengo que escribir, es que solo tiempo mirándome. Ven conmigo y atrévete.
All right, and if you push this record any further, it's going to sound like shit. Like, it's just not going to sound good once it goes to Spotify. So I can get this louder for sure. Like, you know, I could sit here and turn the low end down and get more mids and like push it so it's going to sound louder, it's going to feel louder. I'm going to hit higher LUFs, all that shit. But LUFs are really like a target of the mids and highs, right? Like, it's the vocal range. And some records just don't need that. Like, you guys have to get this through your head. You don't need to hit -5, -4, -3. Like, I have records where I've mastered them to -3.3. You know what I'm saying? Like, really loud. Haunted by You, I mastered that to -3.3 LUFs. So if I went to Music Stacks, right? And this is just like an easy way for me to look this up. But if I go to Music Stacks and look up Bradley Deniston, and I look up Haunted by You, you could see this was loudness -3.35 dB. And that's because this record wanted to be -3.35 dB. I wanted it to be like a full force, energetic, in your face, never stops kind of thing, right? And that was the whole idea of the record. So every record's different. When you get references, you want to hit the reference and then you want to beat the shit out of it. And I feel like I'm beating the shit out of these references. Like, I think these guys should, you know, I don't know. They should think about getting a better mastering engineer. Or just even like, you know, a lot of this has to do with the mix. Let's be real. Like, it starts with the mix. If you got a bad mix, mastering isn't going to save you shit. You know, like, oh, I'm going to get it louder. Yeah, you're going to get a piece of shit louder. Who cares? Well, I made my piece of shit louder. Cool, man. I made my piece of shit wider. Like, nobody cares. All right, so that's otra nota. Okay, so if I went to, let's just say I just jumped over to this track, right? And let's go to the loudest part of this track, because I'm just gonna look at it. Like, if you hit E on the keyboard, you can expand it. It's probably like right in here, right? Like, this is the loudest part of the track, and you can see the peaks right here. If let's just go to this area and let's have our mastering chain on and just see what it sounds like. Okay, so right away that's not working, you know, so you have to really, and why is it not working is because that mid-range, the mid-range in this does not need to be boosted. That 900 is actually like pretty out of control on the snare. Like, listen to the snare, the
¿Cuántas veces yo les dicho a estos güeyes que no me comparen? ¿Cuántas veces yo les dije que yo no soy como ustedes? Esa chiquita está bien durita.
Right, so that chain needs to be tweaked for each song. You need to make sure that it works, right? Yeah, sounds like shit, exactly. Amen. So that's why, like, when you like have this like AI mastering, or you got a guy that like throws it through his fucking chain and he's mastered, I'll put it through ozone, bro. Like, nah, dude, this is a very like fine-tuned thing, man. Like, every single song is gonna need different treatment. It's gonna need different stuff. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it works great for otra nota, like, because that's what this master is for. Right? Totally makes sense for this track. But for that other track, it's not going to work. Like, you're pushing the wrong frequencies. You're doing the wrong thing. You're distorting the wrong parts of the track. You're bringing out bad stuff. You're making it even worse, right? So, yeah, so every song's going to be different. You don't just, like, mastering is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Like, let's just jump around. Como será? Let's hear this one.
Baby, ¿cómo será? Baby, ¿cómo será? ¿Cómo será? Si tu cuerpo tocara mi cuerpo, baby, ¿cómo será? Baby, ¿cómo será? Cuando nos vimos la primera vez, esta chica sale problemática. A veces yo les he dicho a estos güeyes que no me comparan. Tómate un trago.
Right, just jumping from track to track, you hear the differences in the drums, the snare drum being used. Like, all of that stuff is going to matter with that final master. And you got to pay attention to the middle, you got to pay attention to the sides, you got to pay attention to the overall EQ, where the vocal's sitting, how much you want to push maybe the vocal forward or back, right? It all depends. Like, for that, I might even say, hey, man, on this one, I might say, yo, you need to send me one with the snare down. That snare is so hot. It's like even without any mastering, nothing on it. Like, listen how loud the snare is. Right, so right away the snare is louder than the vocal. And we don't want that, man. Like, we really want the snare. The drums should be as loud as the vocal, but never like that much louder. Like, that's too loud. Especially because the snare is so like right in the vocal range. You can't have it being louder, because you're going to run into a real conflict when you go to master that. Like, you're going to have, okay, I got to choose between the snare and the vocal, but they're both in the middle. They both have the same frequencies. One's like momentary, so it's going to make the vocal duck, right? You're going to have all sorts of crazy issues with that. So this is why humans master your shit better. It's just the way it works. Because we're able to say, like, nah, send me a new one. Turn that snare down a little bit. Thicken out the kick drum a little bit. You know, take the tick out of the kick drum at 8K a little bit, right? That way I can push it harder. That way I can shape it better. That way the vocal's gonna pop more. That way I can get it to hit better and be more competitive as a mastering engineer. So these are all things you gotta pay attention to. And then look at the tracks, like look at the dynamic range. Like, look at Tragos versus Otra Nota. Otra Nota is like hitting right here on a momentary basis for like the choruses, but this is like hitting there like almost the whole time, right? So that's a loud track. That's maybe I want him to take it down a little bit, give me more headroom. So even just turning that on and looking at the meters, you're looking at negative 5.5 on the LUFs. You do not want this shit slamming in the mid-range and then the other tracks being at like negative 7.6. Like your shit's gonna be, it's gonna be all over the place. So it's an EP. You got to make sure everything kind of like sits in the same world and makes sense. Do you guys have any questions before I get out of here? I just want to kind of like give you that, like, yo, this is the setup. These are the thought processes. These are how we get the references in. We want to A/B a lot. We want to spend time like understanding how these records are all going to play together, right? So you got to listen to the loudest parts of the records. You got to really like understand the overall frequencies, the drums, the vocals, where things are sitting, and where you can go with the record. Like how far can you push it? You know, should you push it really that far? Should you go to -5 on something that really doesn't want to be at -5? Or should you keep it at like, you know, negative 10, -8, you know? So I'm trying to hit the references. So I'm trying to stay around -7 or so. And that's pretty typical for mastering nowadays. Like if you stay around -7, it's going to sound really good on Spotify, especially if you get that mid-range popping up and you still got the low end and the sub in there. And then the top is like nice and soft, not too, you know, harsh, sparkly. But yeah, any questions? I'll answer any questions you got. I'll give you 5 minutes here. That's what's up. Appreciate that, bro. No mastering questions, huh? You guys got this all figured out? Give it a couple minutes here.
Es que solo contigo ya pierde control. Qué rica se ve tu piel cuando te quemas. Dile a tu novio bye bye. Con él.
It's really cool. I love the fact that you can have like the spectrum with the blue and the orange. Like you can see them together. That's super dope. True peak when limiting? Yeah. Yeah. So actually I always use true peak just because once you degrade the signal, meaning once you take it from a wave FLAC file, if you will, 24-bit, 44.1, 32-bit, 48, whatever you got, whatever you're working with. Once you take it from that and it goes to streaming, you're streaming at what, 192 kilohertz per second, you know what I mean? Or kilobits per second or whatever. It's like really degraded and truncated as a sound. So if you don't use true peak, you risk it basically having distortion that wasn't there, right? Like when you bounced it. So a great way to test that is to bounce it down to an MP3 after you've made a wave, break it down even further to an MP3 and see if any distortion shows up. Like that's really important. But the God particle is a true peak limiter. So when you actually, you know, bounce this out, it's going to be true peaked. You can see right here, it's negative 0.1. So it's going to stay right there. So as long as you don't touch this output, okay? So if you start touching this, you're fucking yourself really hard. Like, I mean, let's be real. Let's just show you exactly what that sounds like. It sounds like trash. So if I go to like otra nota, right, where I'm mastering this.
Ella mueve como mueve. Ella solo busca cuando conviene y se pone mal si no le llegue. Me tienes arrebatado.
All right, so you got a true peak limiter at the end of the God particle, which I like because I know that it's always going to be right there, you know? Like I have it at 0.1, negative 0.1. So it's not even at 0. So if you use that, you're pretty safe. But again, you can not use true peak and you can go, you know, you can go pretty crazy and still get away with it. I just use true peak limiting because I just want to know that it's going to translate and it's going to sound good, and we're not going to get any surprise distortion or artifacts like that or overages when it goes to different streaming platforms. So, you know, you might get it from Spotify when you're, you know, out of Wi-Fi zone and you're using like even a more degraded quality on Spotify. So someone's listening to your stuff and all of a sudden it's, you know, just sounds like shit. And it's like, why is it doing that? It's because it sounded great when you bounced it as a full, you know, zeros and ones, all your data in there, big ass wave file, 32-bit, 24-bit, you know, 44.1. And then it's like, yo, but now it's streaming and it's truncated the word length into like this little tiny word length. So yeah, you're losing data and you risk having overages that way. So hopefully that makes sense. You looking cute today. I appreciate you, sweetheart. Piercy Blue in the house. Hey Brad, thanks for the vid. Do you think Pro Tools is something that I should get and start learning as someone who's more early in the songwriting producing stage? No, I don't think it's necessary. I think you should get a DAW, learn it as much as you can, and master it, and just use that DAW. Doesn't matter. Like, we're in 2023. We're not in 1998 where it was like, yeah, you can only have Pro Tools, you know, and it's way better at everything than all these other DAWs. That's just not the case anymore. Anyone that argues that is just not, they're not educated. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to call anybody names, but it's like, yeah, if you think like, oh, Pro Tools sounds better, Logic sounds better, like a lot of people are like, yo, FL Studio sounds better. It's like, nah, man, you're smoking too much weed. You know what I'm saying? Like you're like tricking your brain. Maybe the plugins that are in FL Studio sound different and they sound better to you, right? So you're going to get that FL Studio sound from the limiter and stuff. The Fruity limiter is always on certain versions of FL Studio. And that's why they're like, yeah, it just sounds better, bro. It's like, yeah, but there's no science to that. You know what I mean? I think a lot of DAWs like have to do with how you freak them, you know, like how you make them feel, how you push into them, how you master, how you limit, what plugins you use in those DAWs. And some stock plugins are just going to make the sound of that DAW for you. Like, for example, in Pro Tools, you're going to get like lo-fi and shit, right? And you don't have that anywhere else. And actually, you kind of do. You have like the AIR lo-fi, but this lo-fi in here, in Pro Tools, is just like, it's just a way better plugin. I mean, it's not a way better plugin, but it has its own sound, you know? Like if I went into Avid, you have all these stock plugins in Avid that make it sound like Pro Tools, like Deverb. Perfect example, right? Nothing sounds like Deverb. Deverb sounds like Deverb. You're not going to get this reverb anywhere else. So that's going to sound like Pro Tools. Same thing with Ableton. Ableton has stock plugins that are going to make it sound like Ableton. Logic Pro has stock plugins that absolutely sound like Logic Pro, right? But yeah, like lo-fi is a great example. You're going to see mixers all over the world using this specific lo-fi that's built into Pro Tools. And it's magic. Like the distortion on it, amazing. Saturation on it, amazing. A little bit goes a shit ton of a long way. Right? The sample rate, sample size, being able to reduce the samples, all this stuff, it all sounds like Pro Tools. And yeah, those are the things that make a DAW sound a certain way. But otherwise, just workflow. Like one thing I just love about Pro Tools is the clip gain, right? Like I can come in here, I can blade, you know, all this, and I could turn this down, right? I could turn this up, and I could turn this down. And then I can go in here, and I can go to Audio Suite, and I could say, hey, on just this, I want to add a compressor, and I want to compress, and I want it to offline process that compressor on just this part. You know what I'm saying? So I was refreshing my subscription license for some reason. So like here, I can like listen to this, right? Right, and then I can render that. Bam. So offline processing in Pro Tools is amazing. It's like one of the best things about Pro Tools. You know, another thing, like when we get into mixing and we get into audio editing and we're really doing heavy audio edits, we're doing vocal lining and all that stuff. Going into Audio Suite and being like, yo, I'm going to open up, Synchro Arts or Melodyne, and I'm just going to do something real quick and bounce it offline. That's just like such a workflow hack, man. Like, oh, I'm going to open up Vocal Line Project 5, right? So this is all offline, and no DAW does this as well as Pro Tools does this. Like, okay, so I'm going to select this. I'm going to go capture, right? Bam. And then I'll go to my other file, like pretend this is vocals. Go to this other file, go to capture the dub. Okay, now render it. And then it's done. Like you don't, like with any other DAW, that process of vocal lining is a nightmare. Like it's just a nightmare. I mean, Cubase is pretty good about it. Studio One's pretty good about it. And I'm sure there's other DAWs that are pretty good about offline processing, but nothing beats Pro Tools with that. I'm sorry. Like, fucking fight me in the comments about it. Like, I've been using all these DAWs for over 2 decades. They get better and better. Yeah, sure. But Pro Tools gets better and better. Logic gets better and better. Like, don't act like, oh, Studio One is just outdoing everybody. Like, motherfucker, you just don't even know. You don't know Pro Tools. You don't know Logic Pro. You don't know how to do it in Ableton. Just because you don't know how to do it in a DAW doesn't make the other DAWs better, But certain DAWs are better at certain things. Like Pro Tools is just better with audio. Audio editing in Pro Tools is just way better. Like when you zoom in on a waveform, like you hit E and you go to the full thing, right? If I zoom all the way into sample accuracy, it's sample accurate. Like I can see the waveform sample by sample. I can move sample by sample, right? Like I can literally go samples here and I can like select from sample to sample, like it's very, very important. Like you can grid this to one sample. You can select one sample. Like that is so hard for so many DAWs to understand or even do. Like Logic Pro shits the bed on this. If you zoom into sample accurate waveform view on Logic, you're going to get like some weird artifacts. You're going to get weird shit that happens. And I can't tell you why. You can redraw waveforms in here, bro. Like you can take this, like you got a clip or a pop or whatever. Like you can redraw it, smooth out the line. Like, if you had like this, if it had a pop in it like that, right? You could like just, you know what I mean? Like you could do whatever you want with Pro Tools. So it's just with audio, it's made for audio editing. You got to remember it's made this way because of the film industry and Avid Post, like Avid, the actual media composer where they're making movies with this shit. So they needed that to be seamlessly integrated with Pro Tools and HD systems where you had the DSP chips that are, offloading all these tracks. Because, when you're mixing a film, you have like the dialogue stems, you have all the sound effects, you have all the music stems. And then all of a sudden you have, 600 tracks of audio. So you gotta have DSP. You can't just run an Apollo. Oh, but I have the Mac Ultra. It's still not going to do it, bro. Like I fucking bet you $1 million. It just will not be able to handle it. So what they have to do is you sync multiple machines together with HD cards and with time code and stuff, right? So you can run all the orchestral stems off this computer, which are then synced to the computer that has all of the synth stems from all the synthesizers that were used in the score. And then that syncs to where the other computer that's running just the video, the movie, and the dialogue and sound effects, right? And they all sync together seamlessly. That's why Pro Tools was and still is the industry standard, regardless of what anybody argues online. None of that shit makes sense. They don't even understand what that means. It's not the industry standard. Like, bro, argue it all you fucking want. They make movies with Avid and with Pro Tools. Sorry, like all your shit you're scoring in Logic, you're scoring in Cubase, you're scoring in all these different programs, it all ends up in Pro Tools. Like the final mix, the mix on the stage, the mix on the film, like it's going to end up in Pro Tools. That's why it's the industry standard. Because when we talk about the industry, the movie, TV, commercials, all this stuff, it makes more money than anything else with audio, So anyway, I digress. Those are the reasons, though. I just want you guys to understand the reasons. It's not because, like, it's the best DAW. It's the best. Like, no, like, what are you doing? Are you doing beats? Are you making beats? Okay, then Ableton, FL Studio, Logic Pro, like, those are better. Like, if you're just making beats, like, Pro Tools is not a good tool for just making beats, right? If you're composing, Logic Pro, Cubase, I would say those are the top. Yeah, you could compose with anything else. You could compose with Pro Tools. Pro Tools would be fine. FL Studio, you could compose with FL Studio. But FL Studio, Ableton, they're made for loop-based music, you know? Like, that's exactly why they made those programs. Like, fruity loops. That's how it started. So that's just the vibe, all right? So anyway, I'm going to get out of here, guys. Appreciate you. Thanks for coming through. Thanks for tuning in, and share the shows, you know, subscribe to the channel, show love for the channel, do whatever you can to help us grow the YouTube so I can do more streams like this, because I really do love sharing this stuff with you guys, and I hope that you get something out of this, and if you do, share it. If you don't, and you feel like I didn't give you any value, and, you know, oh, Brad's giving me all this stuff that sucks for free, like, then cool, like, get out of here, like, tell me to fuck off, and don't share my stuff. But otherwise, be a good human being. Don't be a dick. All right. Peace, guys.